to start off tonight's live stream with the one, the only, the infamous or famous Gideon Joseph Leonard Martinez.
Thank you. Thank you. Honored.
Gideon is one of the only kids I know that has two middle names. How do you feel about having two middle names?
I feel special.
I feel special.
Is that a song?
That is a song.
I don't know that song.
Well, we just made it up.
Okay.
All right, so here's what I want to do with Gideon in this interview. Because of the coronavirus, there's a lot of families that are isolated, quarantined, I think is the word being used. And there's kids and parents in the house in tight quarters for a long period of time. And I see a lot of funny posts about this, parents struggling, knowing how to interact with their kids, pulling their hair out. It's just different, right? It's a different world right now. But for 18 months, we lived in an RV in 350 square feet with a family of 6 and a dog.
So technically, we were already crazy.
We are already crazy. This quarantine didn't make us crazy. We've been crazy for a long time.
That is true.
And so what I was hoping is Gideon could share his wisdom with the world about how to make it through this quarantine, living in tight quarters with kids and their parents. So Gideon, give us some wisdom here. When we were living in tight quarters in the RV, what were some things that you liked or didn't like about being together as a family in such tight quarters for such a long time?
Well, after being in I think it was a pretty big size house for a while.
Yeah.
I think it was good to, downsize and get together. Cause we were in the big house, we were like out other rooms doing our own things. But in the RV, we were able to do more activities together instead of being separated.
Yeah, I remember that. What were some of the activities you liked to do when we were RVing?
I played a lot of chess in the RV.
That's right. You haven't been playing chess as much.
Actually, I have. During this quarantine, after I'm done with school, homeschool, I play chess with my sister Isabel.
You do?
I do.
I've never seen this.
Huh.
I've seen video games.
I do. I was doing the countdown. I came after the countdown. I came up here. And before that, I was playing video games with my sister. All
right. So when we were RVing, you were playing chess. What are the other things that you like to do in tight quarters with the family?
In tight quarters with the family, I like to, just sit down and talk. Because in the RV, you have, different, scenery. And so you just, look outside and random things come up. And then you can also just, play outside. That's the other thing with living in a house that has, a forest. We can go outside and, play football and make forts. So outside activities, indoor activities.
Yeah. So what are some tips or some advice that you would give to other families who right now, for the first time, are experiencing this whole quarantine thing together?
I suggest getting outside. Because you could be, if you can. Because some people might be living in condos or hotels currently. Yeah. I don't know. But if you have a house or you're able to, get outside. Because it's an open area. You can walk around, you can just, you can play sports like football or baseball. You can build forts. You can do endless things outside. And you don't have to be trapped inside during quarantine.
Now, I just saw, Gideon, I don't know if you saw this, but there's some states, some municipalities that are prohibiting people from going outside. So I just saw a video earlier today where a guy was running, getting exercise along the beach, so it had to be an ocean state, and there was a police officer that was running after that person, and when the jogger saw the police was approaching, the jogger just took off and outran the police officer. So maybe not everybody can go outside right now. So what are some other tips that was a good tip, right? If you can go outside, go outside. But if you cannot go outside, what are some other tips from Gideon on how to survive the coronavirus?
Well, since we're trapped inside with our family, I don't want to say use our family, but let's enjoy our family. Play video games, board games, maybe, have, a reading session. I don't know. Spend time together. Because you can spend it alone, or you can spend it together and having fun.
Yeah, and we've had some fun as a family.
We have.
Yeah. So I think that the whole RV experience was kind of like preparation for quarantine for our family.
So we can see the future. We can't, but we kind of did.
Any other final words of wisdom from Gideon?
Stay healthy.
Stay healthy, everybody. You good?
I'm good.
High five.
Thanks, everybody, for having me.
Bye, Gideon.
Bye.
You can shut the door on your way out.
All right. See you, everyone. Nice talking to you.
Well, that was Gideon. He has a lot of wisdom. I love that kid. He's named after me and my father, Joseph Leonard, and my grandfather. All right. So in this episode of the live stream right now, thank you for joining us. Really good to have everybody on here. I see the Redmonds are on. Hi from Tennessee. Love that. Thanks for joining us. And in our time together today, I do want to share a little bit more about Planting Churches Ministries. And there's the website again, plantingchurches.com. I want to tell you a little bit more about Planting Churches Ministries. And I do want to share a little bit more about Teddy, the Ethiopian church planter that Planting Churches Ministries is working with. But before we share that, what I want to do is spend just a few minutes in Exodus once again. And so last week I had shared a little bit from Exodus, the end of chapter 2. And what I want to do now is share just the first verse of Exodus chapter 3. So Exodus chapter 3 starts off with this. It says, "Now Moses was keeping the flock." Moses was a shepherd, right? He started off as the prince of Egypt, right? Growing up in Pharaoh's family. And he experienced a huge demotion. And I often find myself thinking, what was Moses feeling? What was Moses thinking when he was now serving as a shepherd in Midian? Was he depressed? Was he sad? Was he missing the good old days? Was he relieved that the pressures of palace life was behind him? And I can't help but think that many in our world right now maybe are in a similar spot where they're thinking about the good old days, where they're thinking about how life used to be before the coronavirus, before the job loss, before the reduction in hours. Remember how good life used to be back when the kids got to go to school every day and they weren't around home every single day. And sometimes when we are in this place where day after day it's the same, it seems like Groundhog Day, it's never ending, and sometimes we can think back to remember the good old days when we had it so good. I also find myself thinking about the life of Christ, the life of Jesus before age 30. If you remember, he started his public ministry around the age 30, but there's not much recorded from that time. There's not much there's not much history that we know about the life of Jesus, other than he was growing up in Nazareth, and he was working as the carpenter's son. And at the beginning of Jesus' ministry in Matthew 4, Satan tempts Jesus in the desert. And you remember there's 3 temptations. And one of those temptations was for Jesus really to skip the pain and suffering of the cross that was to come and return to his rightful place of glory. And I have to think that Jesus in the incarnation was experiencing a big demotion, just like Moses in the wilderness. Jesus, in his eternal state before the incarnation, I mean, he's the creator. The whole world was created through him. And yet through the incarnation, Jesus was walking in the flesh, and it was a big demotion. I find myself wondering sometimes, like, did Jesus ever get down about that? Did Jesus ever think, wow, here I am in this human body that gets tired and that needs fuel? I wonder, did Moses ever feel that? Did Jesus ever feel that? Did they ever complain? Did they ever grumble? And I think about all the times when we are not experiencing the pleasures of the good old days, when it's the mundane, when we look back fondly on the past, but in the moment, when we kind of feel that demotion, do we grumble? Do we complain? Do we get depressed? And I wanted to encourage you with this thought. God is still good, even when our circumstances are not. Moses was running from Pharaoh. He was living in the wilderness. He was serving as a shepherd. His circumstances were not great. And yet at the same time, God was still good. God was still in control. And if any of you in YouTube world are feeling like maybe your circumstances are not the best right now, maybe you've lost your job, maybe you've lost some income or hours were reduced, or maybe you're stressing out, trying to figure out how you're going to make it another day with the kids at home and just the whole world is upside down. I want you to remember this. God is still God. God is still good. God is still in control, even if your circumstances are not what you would have them be. Let's continue on. Again, Exodus 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock. And then it describes the owner of the flock. It says, of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. All right, so we see that Moses was working in the family business. He was around his father-in-law a lot. And so I have to ask this question, what was their relationship like? What was the relationship like between Moses and his father-in-law? If Moses and his wife Zipporah, if they had a fight, did Jethro know about it? Would Moses come into work and have to walk on eggshells because maybe Zipporah said something to her father Jethro about Moses and Moses doesn't know? Does Jethro know what's going on? And sometimes there's this awkwardness. Did Jethro interfere with parenting? Did he offer advice that was not welcomed? We don't know. We can only imagine what their relationship was like. But right now, with the coronavirus, there's a lot of families that are home. We are quarantined. There's kids who are around their siblings constantly, around their parents constantly. Maybe there's some multi-generational families where grandma and grandpa or aunt and uncle are living with you. And right now, there's a lot of family relationships being put to the test, and it can be difficult. Our families are the first relationships where we learn how to interact with each other, how to get along with each other. Our families are the first places where kids learn kindness or forgiveness or anger or hurt. Our families are the first place where kids learn how to handle sadness, how to handle fear. And so for you parents, I want to encourage you with this. Teach your kids about God by modeling to them God's character, even in the midst of this crisis. Even in the midst where you parents, you don't have all the answers. You have fears, you have questions, you have concerns. But in this time, model to your kids what it's like to understand who God is. Treat your kids the way that you would want God to treat you. Be patient with your kids. Be merciful to your kids. Seize opportunities to teach your kids about God. Interact with your kids in a way that models to them who our Heavenly Father is. And finally, just to finish up this verse, we see in Exodus 3:1 where it says, and he took his flock and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, and they came to Horeb, the mountain of God. All right, so this verse ends with Moses. He's shepherding the flock. It's kind of dull. It's kind of mundane. And, most of life is mundane. Most of life is kind of just going through regular, everyday, not a peak, not a valley, just mundane. Not every moment in our spiritual life is a David and Goliath moment. Not every moment of our spiritual being is some mountaintop experience. Life is filled with the mundane and the peaks and the valleys. And for Moses, the best was yet to come because God was about to do something amazing. In the coming verses, Moses is going to see the burning bush and is going to be used by God in great ways. And for God's children, I was thinking this today, for God's children, the best is yet to come, and that is heaven. The resurrection of Jesus Christ that we celebrated yesterday on Easter, really the resurrection is just a taste, it's a down payment, it's a guarantee of what is to come. The resurrection of Jesus is a taste of what's to come for all of us who are in Christ Jesus. And so let me leave you with this encouragement. Even in the midst of the most mundane circumstances, I want to encourage you to set your gaze on Christ. Set your gaze on our Heavenly Father. Set your gaze on spiritual things to come. And when our gaze is on eternity, that helps us get through the mundane. This season that we're all in with the coronavirus, it's weird, it's not normal. But if we set our gaze heavenly, then we can trust that even if today is kind of weird, even if this season is awkward and difficult, the best is yet to come. There is such a connection between Moses and the Exodus in the Old Testament with Jesus and the Gospels and the New Testament. And this Easter season, I want to challenge you to stand firm in your faith and keep your eyes on Christ. And that is what we are trying to do in the Martinez household. Well, I do want to give you some ministry updates. And like I mentioned last week, we are partnering with PCM Planting Churches Ministries at plantingchurches.com. And this church planting ministry recruits and trains and coaches church planters. And like I said last week, PCM primarily serves in 9 states of Alabama and Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Puerto Rico, and Haiti. And PCM has a strategic partnership with the Southeast District of the Evangelical Free Church of America. But what I wanted to share with you today is I wanted to share with you a little bit about Teddy. And I have a picture here of Teddy. There you go. And so Teddy is the guy in the middle. And Teddy, I met Teddy at a theological conference at Trinity in Deerfield back in February. And Teddy was born in Ethiopia, and he was a refugee to the United States about 7 years ago. So born in Ethiopia, came to the States 7 years ago. And he's theologically trained from seminary, and he has served as a pastor in a mainline denomination. And right now, Teddy lives in Clarkston, Georgia. That's a little northeast of Atlanta. And let me tell you about Clarkston. Clarkston receives about 1,500 refugees every year. And so it's one of the big areas, one of the big towns or cities in the country where when refugees come into the States, this is one of the places that refugees are put. And so in this town of Clarkston, which only has about 12,000 people total, it's not a big area, there's 40 different nationalities and 60 languages that are spoken, and that's all packed into a 1.8 square mile area. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine 40 nationalities, 60 languages, all packed into something less than 2 square miles, 1.8 square miles? It's amazing to think about how all the nations are coming to the United States, and we have an opportunity to reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they're in our own backyard, but not a lot of people know about this. And so I was talking with Teddy in February, and he shared with me that in Clarkston, there really are no white people. If there's a white person on the street, he's probably lost. And there's few churches, and there's no church planting because there's no money in Clarkston. And so churches are not investing there. And yet this is what this is the area that Teddy lives in and is trying to reach by planting a church. Now, Teddy works side jobs to support his family. There's no tithing coming in. There's nothing to support Teddy. And when I was talking with Teddy in February, I asked him, Teddy, what is your biggest need? What is it that you are praying for God to provide you or your church during this season? And he said, a building, or he said a worship facility, a place to worship. And I thought, okay, I've planted a couple churches. I've been involved with several church plants. I get it. Facility is always right up there with a big part of church planting. And so I asked him, well, what type of facility? And I'm picturing like, all right, a 200 seat auditorium and classrooms for children and parking, maybe a 10,000 square foot facility. Like I'm trying to get this picture of what Teddy is thinking when he says he needs a facility. And he said, well, what I really need is about $900 a month to pay rent on a meeting room the size of an apartment. He's talking like 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet, 1,500 square feet. He's not thinking big structures and parking lots and classrooms for kids. He's thinking, no. He just needs $900 a month to rent an apartment, because that's the type of church building that these refugees would be used to, or that this area could accommodate. And I was thinking, boy, that is not a lot. He is asking for something that is very achievable in the typical suburban church plant area. But when you think of planting in an area where it's all refugees, there's very little money, he's just asking for like an apartment, a building the size of an apartment for refugees to gather in, to hold worship services, to pray, to teach, to do Bible education for kids and after school programs. And I couldn't help but think, this is the type of church planter that I want to help. This is the type of ministry that I want to be a part of. And so one of the things that attracts me to PCM, to Planting Churches Ministries, is PCM is trying to build relationships with these types of pastors. And what I want to do with PCM is I want to find and mobilize like 3 other churches to adopt Teddy's church and to relationally form a partnership with Teddy's church. It can be so lonely planting a church. And Teddy's only been in the States for 7 years. Like, he doesn't have this long history of relationships here. But if through PCM we could get like 3 other churches to adopt Teddy's church and build that relational connection, and on a regular basis send missionary teams to Atlanta to do VBS or Bible school, or to help set up the facility when they get it. There's so much that could be done by building partnerships with other churches, and that's what I want to do. One of my greatest joys when I was pastoring in Milwaukee was taking people from the church in Milwaukee and sending them out as teams and going with them and leading teams to Rwanda, to Mexico, to Belize, to Nepal, getting Americans outside of their comfort zone, sending them to locations they're not comfortable with, having them spend a week or 10 days with a people group outside of the normal people group they would interact with, and having them do gospel ministry. And then seeing those Americans come back and be fired up in their own personal faith to then take more steps of ministry in their own backyard. And so that was such a joy for me to mobilize those mission teams from Milwaukee to international destinations. And so what I want to do with PCM is something similar to that, but rather than spending $3,000 on airfare to fly halfway around the world, there's refugees coming to the States, and they're already here in Atlanta. And so we just need to send groups from churches throughout the country to Atlanta. You can get to Atlanta a lot easier than you can get to Africa. And so I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong or one is better. It's just that there is an opportunity to connect churches with church plants like what Teddy is doing. And Teddy is just one story of many. There are so many godly church planters and families and teams that are trying to plant churches, and church planting is hard. But what I want to do is come alongside them, provide training, assessment, coaching, help them get started, and connect them with the resources and other churches. It's not like Bruce, who I think I'll talk about next time. It's not like Bruce and I and the other teammates with PCM can go and do all the ministry together. But if I can mobilize other churches to partner with new churches, to support church planters, to send mission teams, how great would that be if there were 3 churches in the Carolinas that would send their youth group to Atlanta to help with Teddy's church for a week, and maybe not sending them overseas, but sending them right here to the States. And so that is a little bit of something that I'm looking forward to doing with PCM, and why I really care about this ministry and why we're doing this. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a bigger picture of what we're trying to do. Now, of course, to accomplish this work with PCM, we do need to raise financial support. And so I know that it is a difficult time to give, and many of you are living at a place where your own finances are uncertain. Maybe you've lost a job or you're about to lose a job. So I understand it's a difficult time. And so this is really a message for those who have the ability to give and can partner with us financially. But I want to encourage you to go to plantingchurches.com and click on a button that says give or give here, and you'll be directed to a donation page. And there's a drop-down box that will say apply my gift to. When you see the names from that drop-down box, click on my name, Joe Martinez, and make sure that your financial gift goes towards our family as we're trying to raise funds for PCM and the mission that we're starting with them. Of course, like I said last week, the payments are processed by EFT Corporation. PCM is a 501c3 organization, so all taxes are all gifts are tax deductible. And so thank you for considering supporting our family as we can start the work of helping ministries like Teddy's in Atlanta. And so I think in the coming weeks, I do want to share a little bit more about PCM. I do want to share with you about Bruce and Jackie. I think next week I'll share with you about Bruce and Jackie so that you know a little bit more about who the executive director of PCM is and how we got connected and what their story is. There's a really great connection through the Free Church in Wisconsin where we are to what they're doing. And so I think that is it for tonight. I do want to thank you for joining this live stream. I do want to thank you for your support, your friendship, your partnership, and I look forward to seeing you next week at 7 o'clock, and we'll continue marching through Exodus a little bit, and I'll tell you a little bit more about PCM with Bruce and Jackie. So that's it for now. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.